Hello everyone, TLSG here, back again with another daily Marvel Snap video. So today we have a list that is built around not having Zabu, and it is intended to still be incredibly consistent. So with this list, it has one main purpose: flood your cards onto the board, absorb some really large, big power with your Dracula, and have it guaranteed to either pull into a Red Skull or an Infinite. Sometimes you're going to play Zero with Red Skull, and then you can still pull into your Infinite. This list is incredibly accessible if you are into Series 3. You can plug in just about any of the one-cost drops. You can sub them in for something else. So if you don't have Titania, if you don't have Ebony Maw, I would go with something else that offers a really strong value. So something like a Blade, a Rocket Raccoon, a Squirrel Girl, or an Ant-Man should all do fantastic in this list, and they still focus around being able to flood your cards onto the board. So with your armor and your Cosmo, you can either protect or counter Death and Destruction decks, Silver Surfer decks. You have a lot of flexibility in being able to push and outmaneuver those decks, and it can compete with just about any list that I've run up against, which is kind of surprising for what it is, because it doesn't look flashy, but it's similar to our last build where it's not meant to be flashy. It is meant to do what it does very consistently every single game, no matter what you draw into. And those are typically my favorite lists because they're easy, they're straightforward to run, and they're going to do very well for you. And so it's a lot easier to determine if you should snap or if you should retreat in any particular matchup. And so that is a brief rundown of the deck. Let's go ahead and jump over into a couple of games, and I'll show you how to navigate it. All right, first up we have JRH White. The first location is Central Park. We have our Titania and our Ebony Maw, but I don't necessarily want to drop either of those just yet. We don't know what they're running. We don't know how Titania is going to perform for us, and we can't guarantee that we'll have enough of a lead by dropping our Ebony Maw. And so we went ahead and skipped on turn one, even though we could have played some cards. It just didn't feel safe enough for us to. So I'm going to go ahead and do our Zero. We'll do Ebony Maw into Hala. That should give us a good bump in making sure that we win that location. Unless they have a Killmonger, if they're running a Destruction deck, then we're going to have to rely on trying to counter their Killmonger with a Cosmo, which we might be able to do. I would imagine if they're going to push it, maybe they push it into Hala. I would say it comes down to either Central Park or Hala if they're going to drop Killmonger, but they haven't given us any kind of indication of what deck they're running, so we honestly have no idea. So it's a Lockjaw rotation, so most commonly something like a Jane Lockjaw deck. And so we know that this left lane is probably going to be very heavily cycled. It will probably have some pretty strong cards in throwing their Wasp, trying to pull out a Magneto, trying to pull out the Infinite, or whatever big cards they have in this list. And so the Wasp or the Yellow Jacket is not great for them. They do flip into the Chavez, which is okay, but they are capped at 12 power there now, which is really scary when you're running a Lockjaw deck. Typically, I want to ease into using that power. Throwing it out onto the board early is very, very scary, because then your opponent has the exact information. They know exactly what they need to maybe either push enough power or just get that advantage over you in that location. So we're going to go ahead and play Red Skull into the Avengers compound, and then next turn we will probably be able to play all three cards, unless we draw into our Infinite, and then we wouldn't be able to, but the Sunspot is actually great. I think we're going to play the armor into the left lane, and then we could maybe do something like a Sunspot. I was about to start calculating what we needed to make sure that we won this location, but armor would make sure that even if they had the Killmonger, they wouldn't be able to clear out our power in this lane. We would have been able to lock in our advantage. One up, one down. Let's go ahead and jump over into the next one. All right, next up we have Zero's Chest, Demian DE. The first location is the Big House, which is actually pretty good for us. We can flood just about as much power or any of our cards into that location besides the Dracula, the Red Skull, and the Infinite. Otherwise, we can play just about anything there. And Death's Domain is okay. If we draw into our Nightcrawler, we can move some power over there. If we draw into our armor, then we can protect that lane as well. And so we're just going to play the Sunspot here and then see if we want to play our Ebony Maw next turn or not. We might just hold it. That's a decent target to be absorbed by the Dracula if it comes down to that. And so then the last location is the Crimson Cosmos, which is the opposite of the Big House for us, and it's a little bit difficult for us to push power consistently there. So I do think we're going to play our Ebony Maw into the Big House. That means if they have a Killmonger, we are very susceptible to having this lane swung against us. And they do use Bishop, so they could be running a Silver Surfer deck. Some Silver Surfer decks do use Killmonger, and we are unable to place our Maximus or our Nightcrawler to push power into Death's Domain because it is a one-cost card. And so they do have the Killmonger. They actually drop it early. I think if I was them, I probably, knowing that they could have completely made sure that they won the big house location, I think I probably would have held it until maybe this turn or the last turn versus dropping it early. So we're going to be able to do a Maximus into the big house. If they have a Brood, they'll probably play it into Death's Domain, and so we might not be able to find our win, but we do have a decent shot. We have an okay shot. We have the Dracula down, so that's going to guarantee to pull into either 19 or 14 power. We get our armor just a touch too late. I think I am going to move the Nightcrawler over just in case they don't have the Brood. Actually, we're going to go ahead and they have initiative, so if they do use the Brood, they will only get 2 Broodlings here, and so those would be 2 power each, and then if they got buffed by the Silver Surfer, it would be a total of 10 power. We're going to be able to outpower 10 in Death's Domain with the armor and the Maximus, and then we should, I think, be able to find our win condition in Crimson Cosmos. And at this point, I'm confident enough that typically I would snap, but I do want to let this one play out just to see if what I thought they were going to run does turn out to be what they run. And so they do have the, wow, the Polaris is surprising. So maybe the Brood goes here. No, it's the Silver Surfer there. And so they're only going to compete for the big house and the Crimson Cosmos. So we have the guaranteed win. They do move our Nightcrawler over, so we don't get that cheeky play line, but we get the armor, we get the Maximus lockdown, and then we get the guaranteed pull in Crimson Cosmos. So again, another one that just feels like it shouldn't be that easy, but that's what I've found with this list, is that all of these games come up, and typically no matter what the opponent throws at us, it is very straightforward. So let's go ahead and jump over into the next one. Next up, we have the mod in our Discord. We have Alexander, and there's no telling what they're running. Sometimes it's a Valkyrie control deck. One thing is for sure is that they do typically really like the tech of Arrow, and so with that and being able to flood the board, we can make Arrow a lot less impactful because we can pretty much fill up our board, and then they don't have anywhere to pull those cards around into. And so we're gonna go ahead and play 0. We'll be able to play Maximus into the kiln location, give us a pretty good tempo advantage, and then if it looks like we need to push even more, we can do our Dracula there as well. So last turn we did use 0, so we could 0 out the Ebony Maw, and I was originally thinking of going with the Maximus instead, but there's really no downside to running the Ebony Maw here versus Maximus unless we think that he has a Killmonger. Otherwise, we have this resource, and then if we have extra energy at the end of the game, we can use it then, but if we don't play Ebony Maw this turn, we won't be able to play it, and it'll just have to be absorbed by our Dracula. And so we are going to 0 out the Ebony Maw. They have the Daredevil, so they're looking for a Professor X lockdown or something very similar. Wow, the X Mansion gives us a Dracula. What is this game? Oh my gosh. So we're going to be able to play our second Dracula into Kiln. On turn 5, we can always do something like a Titania and a Maximus. Both of those are going to get doubled in Shuri's lab. Just insane value that we have gotten from the X Mansion. That is incredibly tough. That is one of the worst splits that I have seen. Not the worst, but it is a very, very bad one. And so with the Warpath, I honestly don't know what they're running. We could double down on our Red Skull, which I think we do. We're going to double down on our Red Skull. That's going to be 30 power in Shuri's lab. We still have the 7 and the 5 if we need to pull into the X Mansion or Kiln. We have Sunspot that we can play and just skip with the rest of our power. If we draw into an Infinite, then we can play Sunspot and Titania. That way, one is guaranteed a 7 and one is guaranteed a 20. Just the double Dracula is it's insane value. We shouldn't be in this position, but again, third game in a row, here we are. And so they storm the Shuri's lab location to make sure that we don't get the double power from our Red Skull. They beast their cards back in. I know one was Misty Knight. I don't remember what the other one was, though. So I'm going to go ahead and play Sunspot and Nightcrawler into the flooded lane. If they do use a Valkyrie here, then our Sunspot will be able to absorb some additional energy. They will get the win in the flooded lane if that is what they go with. But if they're just pushing some raw power, then we might be able to outpower them with the Sunspot and the Nightcrawler. We're going to guarantee that one of our Draculas pulls into Maximus and the other one Titania. Actually, do we just play Maximus? We don't need this one to pull into anything. So I'm going to actually play Maximus. I think this Dracula, since it was placed on the board first, will pull into a card first, and then this one won't have anything to pull into, but we already have the win in the kiln location for now. And so we do have the Sunspot, the Nightcrawler, the Maximus comes down. The leader to copy our cards is interesting. Oh no. And so I think we still get the win because of the deficit in the kiln location, but with them copying our Maximus, it forced us to draw into some additional resources, and so then Dracula wasn't guaranteed to pull into that 5 anymore, and Titania actually lives to tell the tale. She's still in our hand. Alright, next up we have Thug Goofy. The first location is Warrior Falls. Not great, but not terrible for us either. We can always do 0 into an Ebony Maw, and then if they throw anything there early, it can get destroyed. We can dig and hope for our armor to protect the lane entirely. Or we could always move a card over and play multiple in there on the last turn with something like a Nightcrawler. But I do think we are going to lead with our 0 here. So they play a Sunspot into the middle location, which does turn out to be the Big House, which the Big House is fine for us. We're able to play a lot of cards relatively easily into that location. The only thing that is restricted is our high end, so our final 3 cards in the Dracula, the Red Skull, and the Infinite. We are going to go ahead and play Ebony Maw into Warrior's Fall. If they want to throw anything there, they know that they have to beat at least 7, and it gives us the option to, whenever we think that they're going to do a big play there, we can move our Nightcrawler over to make sure that Warrior Fall absorbs Nightcrawler instead of our Ebony Maw. I'm going to go ahead and throw Maximus into the Dark Dimension. That's probably the most ideal location we could have asked for. We could do Dracula there as well, which we might end up needing to do. And then we're just competing for the Warrior Fall location instead. Oh, so they storm the Warrior Fall location. Very interesting. So now instead of hiding our Dracula here, I think we push our Dracula into the flooded lane, and that leaves an air of uncertainty. They don't know exactly how much power we're going to be able to push into that location. And so as long as this lands, I think we may follow up with a snap after this, even though we don't have our Red Skull, we don't have our Infinite. And they know that because the White Queen, I think we still snap into it because we have really good chances to draw into those cards and to make sure that they are played. So I think we're going to play Titania and our Sunspot, and we're going to do Titania first. What we're trying to hope for is that they play a card into the Big House as well this turn, which will force them to having that lane capped out. We can then maybe play one additional resource to have it bounce back our way. They won't be able to play anything into that location. They'll just have to absorb some extra energy with their Sunspot. I think we have a big enough lead advantage in the Dark Dimension that we don't need to push too much. Plus, I'm uncertain of if Titania would give us the win or if it would accidentally bounce to their side in the Dark Dimension, so I don't like that play line either. And so they do snap. I'm going to go ahead and lock this play in. We don't know what they played. They didn't play anything into the Big House, so we do send them the resource, unfortunately, and we may leave it there. So depending on what play line they have, I don't know. We're going to play armor into the Dark Dimension to try to protect our cards here. We do have the guaranteed Infinite pool. We have the Maximus in this location. So unless they do maybe a Shuri and something else, so they play our Titania in the Big House, which bounces our Titania back. The arrow play comes down, the Gamora comes down, so it is a really, really big lane. Unfortunately, it is too big. But we win the Big House deficit. Oh my gosh, I had thought we had lost that one. I thought because we got outpowered in the far right lane that bouncing the Titania back was our losing condition, but it was enough to give us that advantage. So that is another one that feels like we shouldn't have won, but it just continues to happen. That this deck is really good at tricking and feigning weakness, and then all of a sudden it just bombards the board, and it can outpower a lot. So this deck, even though it is filled with 1-cost cards, we just flooded 55 power onto the board, which is really, really strong, and we did it relatively easily and consistently. Let's go ahead and jump over into the next one. All right, next up we have Exo Mathias. The first location is the Grand Central, so one of our cards will pull into that location after turn 5 unless it gets changed, and so those are most likely going to be our really big resources. So that's almost like a pseudo Dracula for us. Never mind, it is going to end after turn 4 because of TVA. With that, I think we're going to flood Iceman and Ebony Maw into the left lane. That's going to guarantee 9 power over there, which is a decent push. And then we do have our Maximus that we can drop next turn, maybe. Ooh, so they skipped. So that would bring, I don't know. I don't know what that would bring down or what they're planning on running. They could have a Zabu here. And if they do have a Zabu, they could play Zabu this turn and then play 2 really big 4-cost resources next turn, which would be really, really rough for us. We are going to play our Maximus. I feel like we have to play it. They play the Agent 13, which doesn't generate a card for them. I mean, I think we're in a decent spot unless they have a Killmonger, which would wipe out all of our power. Otherwise, I think we're in a decent spot. We're going to have 4 power. It'll get reduced down to 3 in Jotunheim. They would have to play in all 3 locations this turn to be able to make sure that they win this one. This is another good advantage of the Flood deck that has a really low curve, because even if you get a TVA game, you can just flood your power out onto the board and do so pretty consistently. Not a typical game to end on, but we are going to go ahead and end there. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to leave it a like and a comment down below. And as always, this has been TLSG. Later, guys.